Man. I accused Jeremy, my son, who assigned these lessons, of picking this lesson for me because I had twins. Jacob and Esau, How to Get Past the Family Feud is the name of our lesson this morning. We'll begin in Genesis 25, if you want to go ahead and start turning there, because I divided this lesson up into three different parts. We have the background, the deception, and then the reconciliation. And we're going to talk about each of those separately today. Genesis chapter 25. Let's begin down in verse 19. Now these are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it is so, why then I am this way? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. That's where we'll stop for right now. So Rebekah was barren. Where have we heard this before? Kind of runs in the family, I guess, in that particular family gene pool. She was barren, had no children. And Isaac was concerned. What had Isaac been promised?
Father of many nations.
Father of many nations, but he was not a father. So he prayed, and she did have, she did conceive, and she apparently had more than just normal baby kicks going on, because she was concerned about it. And I can tell you that when you have twins, that they kick a lot. You can just ask Diana; she'll tell you. Our twins were born, and they were 7'9", 7'4", so big babies, and they kicked a lot. And I don't know. I know there's a thing going on now where in our nation, men want to have babies. I guess, they can have babies. Don't ask me why they say that, but they can have babies. They can do everything a woman can do, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to have a baby. I don't want to have twins for sure, and I don't want to have twins that big. So I give it to all the ladies that have the babies. It isn't easy. Is that not correct?
I never heard of one that big. Twins that big.
They were big. Then their baby brother came along, and he was 10'2", so
He gets spanking that.
he was a giant. But back to the twins. She asked God about explaining it, and he said not only did he give her a child, but he explained that she was going to give birth to 2 nations. So, continuing in verse 25, now the first came forth red, all over like a hairy garment. A strange way to describe your child, like a hairy garment. And they named him Esau, after his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. So you've got one that's hairy all over, and one was holding on to his ankle when he came out. Twins. They're always after each other, all the time. So Esau, meaning hairy one, or one who finishes in the Hebrew. Jacob, meaning one who grasps the heel, or the supplanter. They were fraternal twins. And we won't go into the biology of what all that means, but they were totally different in their appearance. And I dare say that if Jeremy's brother Joshua came into the auditorium and sat back there, if you didn't already know him, you would never guess that he was Jeremy's brother, because he doesn't look anything like him. He's a lot smaller. He's got less hair. And he just looks different. And I know you know twins. I mean, we have a set of twins that grew up here. But they're, even when they're identical, they're not the same because they have different personalities. Now, remember, there was a promise from God in play here, and that promise was that these things would come to pass, that many nations would come from them, and every nation of the earth would be blessed. Abraham's promise kind of goes in four parts. He was going to be given offspring, he was going to be given land, he would be blessed himself, and the nations would be blessed through him. Abram was promised that in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 4, and then again in 22, verses 15 through 18. Isaac was given that promise again in Genesis 26, 3 through 5. Someone turn to 26 and read those verses. Genesis 26. Just turn over the page and read 3 through 5.
Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws.
Okay. So the promise continued because Abraham was faithful. That's why Isaac was given this promise, because Abraham was faithful. Now, let's pick back up in chapter 25 and verse 27. When the boys grew up, this is the New American Standard Version if it didn't quite match your version, New American Standard. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. When Jacob had cooked stew, well, let's stop right there. Jacob was a homebody, we would call, and then Esau was the outdoorsman. Different skills, different temperament. They enjoy different things. Most twins do. But how to get past the family feud is the subtitle of this. We're fixing to get to that. What was one of the mistakes that the parents made? Never play favorites with your children. That is a big mistake. It's easy to do, though, because a lot of times we have something more in common with one child rather than the other. I see people do that a lot, and I see people say, "Oh, he's my favorite," in front of the other children. Big mistake.
Yeah, don't say it out loud.
Don't say it out loud. Correct. No, they didn't dress them alike. You know, they weren't the type where you had to have a name tag on them to tell who was different. You know, oh, that was Jacob. This was you could tell them apart. But and it's so funny because when our twins were little, they looked more alike. They had the same blonde hair, and it kind of floated around on their head, and they were similar in size at the time. And we put them in a twin stroller and ride over, and they'd go, "Oh, well, how do you tell them apart?" And if you look at their face, one kind of looked like her, one kind of looked like me. So you could, but just if you didn't know them, you didn't know they all looked together. So they couldn't tell them apart. The what? What now?
There's only one right answer.
Now, we used to say that. They'd always say, you know, your kids will always come and say, "I'm your favorite, right? I'm your favorite. I'm your baby. I'm your favorite." And we would say, "Yes, you are. He's my favorite middle son. His brother's my favorite oldest son. And then the baby, of course, is our favorite youngest son. He's my favorite engineer." You know, you do things like that. You can kind of say that without excluding the other children. Your kids probably said the same thing. "I'm your favorite, right?" "Yeah, you're my favorite." Or, "I'm the baby." Oh, I will tell you right now, I was the baby of the family. I was the only boy. I had 3 older sisters. You think I was spoiled? Oh, yeah, definitely. And my sisters knew it, and they were mean to me, but they did take up for me later when I grew up, and we were all more along the same lines. But I was definitely spoiled. Why is it wrong to show favoritism to your children? What's that?
Said it causes jealousy, animosity among the kids.
I was listening to a lesson by Brother David Phillips this morning, and he talked about a stumbling block. You don't place a stumbling block before people. That is a big stumbling block in the eyes and mind of a child when he knows he's not the favorite. He's behind that 8 ball all the time, so to speak. And, you know, we always talk about nature, nurture. Do you nurture a child, and can you shape his personality? And can you damage his psyche? A lot of it's not hocus pocus, but it's above me. You know, it's above my pay grade, talking about psychology and those kind of things. Yes, you can. I mean, it's been proven time and time again. People can turn out different the way you treat them as a child. Resentment plays a part in this particular story. Resentment plays a part in most families, I would say. Is there a family that doesn't have conflict? Yes, sir.
If they don't have them yet, they will.
It's human nature. Conflict is in everything we do. We have conflict at work. We have conflict in our schooling. We have conflict in the church. We have conflict at home. That doesn't mean it's, some terrible thing and people are getting killed over it. It has happened, but not the majority.
If a man had no children and his wife had passed away, he would still have conflict.
Even within himself.
That's right.
Yeah, and within himself.
He'd argue with himself.
You know, who's going to win?
That's the bad part.
No winner.
Yes. And I have seen this in my friends, and when you get their background, you understand where they come from. You have a defeatist attitude. You know what that means? When you have been told all your life you're not the favorite. You just, I'm not going to be the favorite. I'm not going to win. It's not going to make a difference, so I'm not even going to try. I see that a lot in people. And, people say that it's not correct for psychologists and people to say, well, you could tell in an adult how that person was raised as a child, what kind of childhood he had. Yes, you can, definitely. You can tell when that person was never given any kind of boundaries or told no, those kind of things. And you can tell when they were very, overly strict upon, and they just, when they finally get to make their own decisions, they don't know how.
As a father is one that doesn't show favoritism. He has always had his select people that he's used throughout Scripture, and there's been those that were, a man after God's own heart, like David. Some that were extra special, it seems like. It's the way that God judged and the way that he interacted with people and what he expected from people. It was always consistent across the board, and it still is today.
Correct, because is one soul worth more than the other? Whether it's twins, whether it's Jacob and Esau here, whether it's somebody else in your family. A soul is a soul, and they're all worth, what does it say? The whole world, right? Right into it. And, they do say that abusers that were abused normally are more likely to turn into abusers. Not always.
Brother, I'd like one comment. Those things are very, very much true. In my work with children for many, many years now, I certainly see that. However, God made all of us when we become adults or somewhere along the way to make choices ourselves.
Correct.
As well. And there are children who have been raised with love and concern and care who they themselves at some point
Make a bad
I
decision.
talked to a man who thought he might need to resign as an elder. He had a son that was deacon. He had a daughter of faithful Christian. And when she was 47, I believe, she just went awry. And I think maybe had an affair, whatever. And I said, brother, she's been out of your home for a long time. And what she has done, she chose to do. Because we are all choosers.
Right.
But
Free will.
Those bad attitudes toward a child has a major effect toward them. And it's you see a child come down there to camp sometime and you can tell they've been either neglected, as you said, or browbeaten. And either one is not good.
No. And a lot of times, because we've known those kind of children also, when they get in a loving environment, they just bloom, yes. And we'll see Esau's going to change. We'll get there. All right, beginning in verse 27 is the deception, the foolish promise. Esau is going to do something that we don't understand. Really doesn't make any sense, but it is part of our story. Verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now, Isaac loved Esau because he had the taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. When Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, please, let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished. Some versions say starving. Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, first sell me your birthright. Esau said, behold, I'm about to die, so of what use is the birthright to me? And Jacob said, first swear to me. So he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose up and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Esau gave away his birthright because he was hungry. Do we really think that he was about to die? Really? No. Yeah, how many of us have all said, I'm about to starve to death? I say it almost every day. I've never been to the point of starving to death. You can tell. It's just a phrase we use. And he put no thought and no stock in the whole concept of the birthright, which was very special to those people. The firstborn got the better half. He got the first blessing. He carried on the family name. He just threw all that away.
We can certainly see this from the standpoint of if he was really about to die. Let's say he had a diabetic problem, which it's evident he didn't.
Right.
But then I'm sure it would have gone the other way. That said, God would have said something to the effect, but Jacob did not love his brother enough to take care of him when he was in need. So evidently he was not really about to die because the Lord put the blame square on Esau.
Was Jacob guilty of doing something here? He deceived his brother. He was looking for that birthright. He was one of those twins where he was resentful that he wasn't the firstborn. And of course, Joshua never let him forget he's the firstborn by 1 minute. So he's the older brother, always, by 1 minute.
Let's not forget that Rebecca had a plan, right? God
Yes.
told her,
We ain't got there yet. Don't jump ahead. But yes, you're correct.
I don't think they had to be deceitful and unkind to one another in order for God's plan to come to
No.
fruition. Just like Judas didn't have to deny the Lord. The Lord, history would have read differently if Judas had the right kind of heart to not betray the Lord.
Correct.
And
But it was going to happen.
yeah, it's going to happen.
Right.
But it didn't have to happen exactly this way. They did what was wrong, and God didn't want them to, but they did.
In chapter 26, we see that Isaac was blessed by God, became very wealthy. And in the last verse of that chapter, it tells us that Esau married 2 Hittite women, and they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Can your children bring you grief? Yes, they can. A lot of it. They can also bring you happiness and joy. So, Esau's making some bad decisions. And it's going to affect what he does. In chapter 27, we're going to read about that deception. Rebekah, it was Rebekah's idea. Let's beginning in verse 1. And it became about when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see that he called his older son Esau and said to him, my son. And he said, here I am. Isaac said, behold, now I am old and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field, hunt game for me, and prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die. Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for the game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, see, they keep saying my son, her son, his son. They've been split up the whole time. Behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me, that I may eat, and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, therefore, my son, listen to me as I command you. So she was basically telling him what to do. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats from there, and I may prepare them as a savory dish for your father, such as he loves. Was he going out to hunt goat? More than likely it was venison or something to that effect. But she's going to cook it so it tastes like goat. It tastes like chicken. Like what I say. She's going to cook it so it tastes savory. Then you shall bring it to your father that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death. And Jacob had answered, behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will fail me, then I will be as a deceiver in his sight. I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. So, did Jacob kind of realize this is wrong? Yeah, he did. He's gonna find me out as a deceiver. He's going to know I'm lying to him because I'm smooth and my brother's a hairy guy. Well, she had a plan for that too. But his mother said, your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go get them for me. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made a savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her elder son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the young goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. She also gave the savory food and the bread which she had made to her son Jacob. And I know we've all seen pictures in young children's Bible classes of how he looked, and he's wearing the sheepskin and that kind of stuff. But just imagine this scene in your mind. This is a grown man dressed in sheepskin around his arms and around his neck, wearing his brother's clothes so he can go into his blind father to deceive him. I mean, you can't write this stuff any better than that for a TV movie. But this happened. This is true. This is what this conniving little mother did to get her son to get the blessing. So he did that. He came to his father, my father, here I am. He said, who are you, my son? I kind of think, at first, he kind of knew something was off. He said, Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please sit and eat of my game that you may bless me. Now, it doesn't say he tried to disguise his voice or anything like that, so I'm not sure how that worked, but he thought something was off. Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have it so quickly, my son? Because I just told you to go out in the field, now you're back. So he's like, the story's trying to unravel. Please come close that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my Esau or not. So Jacob came close to Isaac, his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. And he asked him again, point blank, are you really my son Esau? And he said, I am. So he said, bring it to me, and I will eat of my son's game that I may bless you. And he brought it, ate it. I also brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, please come close and kiss me, my son. So he came close and kissed him, and when he smelled the smell of his garments, he blessed him and said, and then he gives him the blessing. So, this was Rebekah's plan. She told her son, just do what I say, and Jacob went along with it. So we have to fault both of them. Now, I discussed this a little bit with Jeremy last night at our get-together.
Because they were doing the wrong thing.
I think in this age in particular, the patriarchal age, it was the father, the head hold of the family. It was his responsibility to pass that blessing to the firstborn. Obviously here he was deceived, but it was still his responsibility. God had blessed him with it. He was to bless the son with it.
That is correct. Now, the Bible doesn't defend his actions. And the book of Genesis and Hebrews do emphasize Esau's sin. He despised his birthright, back in Genesis 25:23. So this is God's plan. Sometimes we don't understand how things work out with God's plan, because, nations came upon nations. Nations were used to knock the children of Israel down several times, and then they got their comeuppance, you would say. So,
Esau, in a sense, has already given it away.
yeah, he already gave it away. He didn't care about it.
I thought it was sort of interesting that Esau said, I'm about to die.
Yeah.
Isaac now comes along and says, I'm about to die, so I've got to do something. So, both of those cases.
Well, he said, I don't know when I'm going to die, but I'm close. I'm getting there.
Sermon idea.
Yeah, I have an idea. It's coming soon.
Don't you think that was, well, he's about to die?
Yeah. Now, God did bless Esau, even though he was mad at his brother and wanted to kill him. That was his first reaction when he found out. He said, I'm going to kill my brother. That's when the parents separate them. All of us parents have had those times where you say, go to your room. And I think it's funny, not so much the twins, but Adam, the younger one, always had a way of coming at things from a funny point of view, because I told him one time, go to your room. He goes, Dad, we're in my room. Trying to, alleviate the whole getting in trouble thing. It didn't work. But he did make a point that I was standing in his room and said, go to your room. And you've got to separate them. Give them some space. Otherwise, they are going to kill each other. That's kind of what they did here. And sometimes, we were discussing this at our family the other day, and Diana doesn't remember this, but I remember just succinctly. We lived in Wetumpka, and the kids were probably 4 or 5 years old, maybe. Adam wasn't here yet, so they were younger than 5. They were maybe 4 or 5, and they were in the backyard, and they were, they wrestled and tussled a lot, but they were swinging fists. And Diana goes, "You need to go out there and break that up." I went, "Nope. Let them fight it out." A few minutes later, they're out there playing again. They did whatever they did and got, their differences were settled, and they played again. I said, "You don't go interrupt that." But to a mom, they're going to hurt each other. No, they're not going to hurt each other for real. So she separated. They went through that and got them apart. So now we come to the reconciliation. After marrying 2 wives and a little trouble with the father-in-law, Jacob's on the move and close to the land of Edom, where his brother Esau lives. And it had been more than 20 years since they had parted. Turn over to Genesis chapter 32. Chapter 32.
Isn't it interesting that Jacob uses the deception and then turns around and is immediately deceived? Laban deceives him.
Yep. They have the old saying, what goes around comes around.
When these families keeps making the same mistake.
Yes.
Always putting blame before you pass on. When Isaac is telling Esau about this, he says, "Your brother's used this trickery. He's the one who's taken away."
Exactly.
Isaac might say, "Well, I didn't have any part of this."
And, let's not skip over it. You've got Laban, comes around. They got the covenant of Mizpah in chapter 31. So he's getting on. He's been successful. Now he's coming home, and he knows he's fixing to encounter his brother. In verse 3, beginning of verse 3, chapter 32. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He also commanded him, saying, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now." So he's starting to say, "My servant, your servant," being subservient to Esau. He also commanded him, saying, "Thus you shall say to my lord, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants, and I have sent them to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight." The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and furthermore, he is coming to meet you, and 400 of his men are with him." What's that sound like to you? He's coming to wipe us out. He's bringing a whole army. So one of the lessons we can learn, it's not today's lesson, but things aren't always what they appear to be. You can't judge, the old say, you can't judge a book by its cover. Don't jump in before you know all the facts. So he's fearing for his life. And beginning in verse 9, he asked God for help. Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you,' I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and of all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. For with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. For you and I will surely prosper, and for you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered." So he's asking God for help. And then he's kind of reminding God that, well, you said that you're going to bless me and all the nations of the earth through me. So, he's kind of telling God, it's time to put up or shut up.
Thanking God forgot,
Yeah,
We think,
God doesn't forget.
we think maybe he'll pass me by, but if God said it, it's so.
So, before he meets Esau in chapter 33, what happens between Jacob and some person? It's pretty important because it involves changing his name. He wrestles with an angel. Later on it says God himself. Changes his name. Gives him a permanent limp. Changes his name to Israel. But back to chapter 33, still calling him Jacob at this time. Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. He put the maids and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. So he kind of had the concubines in the front. The wife that he married first that he really didn't want second, and then his wife with the child that he really loved last. Yeah, he showed favoritism. Never learn. I can lose these, and if it's really bad, I can lose these, but I don't want to lose that one. He's my favorite. Have you seen a continuing story throughout the Old Testament? And it's going to continue with the children of Israel, where they never learn a lesson. They fall over and over again. They fall into idolatry. They come back. They fall. They come back.
How can these people be so weak and stupid?
Because they're human.
I don't know how we can.
Yeah, I don't know how we can because we're human.
That's why I feel sometimes like, I thought at one time, preacher, Brother Carpenter, he had a little vest Bible, and when he'd go to Judgment Day, he'd hold his little Bible up, and the Lord would say, oh, I didn't know you were a preacher, come on in here. But, we are human, and there are conflicts, and spiritual conflicts, and sins that we have to repent of, and a preacher is, sad to say, a human. But that's the problem, I think.
Well, people seem to think they put preachers on a pedestal. They tend to put elders and deacons on a pedestal, that they're not human. They don't make mistakes. Well, we do. We all make mistakes because we're human. God gave us, that's the beauty of the human. We were made after God. We have a soul. We have a spirit. But he also made us where we have free will. And that free will means we can be stupid. And we can do the same thing over and again. And we can make sins that make no sense to anybody else. And we can fall into these same sins over and over again and keep repenting and keep falling into these sins. That was another part of David's lesson this morning was, how many times do you forgive somebody? And how do you know when they're really repenting? You don't. But you still forgive them if they're willing to repent. But you can't forgive them if they don't repent. But you can always be willing to forgive them and don't let that affect your life.
You said this was beauty, and I think you're right, the beauty of this. My 10 or 11-year-old son asked me, Daddy, why did God give us bad things to do? Why didn't he just give us good things to do? And my 5 or 6-year-old son was coloring. He didn't even look up. He said, maybe God wanted somebody to love him just because they wanted to. And I thought, that's a pretty deep thought for such a little child. But
It's right.
we serve God today.
Yep.
We don't serve him like the angels who've seen and know.
Right.
We serve him because we chose to. And that is, as you said, the beauty of it.
And, I've had that conversation with people who you think, based on their attitude, the way they act, the things they say, they just hate coming to church. It just does nothing for them, and they sit on the pew and begrudge it the whole time, and then they go home. And I'm thinking, you volunteered for this. You signed up for this when you went down in that water. It's not like you didn't have a choice. And that's the I guess you'd say it's an excuse, but that's what they say about our military service now. It's all volunteer service. Army, all of it's volunteer. Nobody's drafted. So if you're there, it's because you wanted to be. So quit complaining about it. But they still complain about it. But yes, we are human and we have free will. All through this story, free will is exhibited because, yes, things got done by God's providence and his will was carried on and things happened as the story we know it. But at the time, they're like making decisions right and left that are not right, that are sins, and we don't understand. But it all works out in the end.
What's the passage, Terry? God can work all things together.
Correct.
He
Romans
didn't say
8:28.
everything's good, but he can work that for good.
Yeah, it doesn't promise everything's going to be good.
That's right.
Because I guarantee you everything in your life is not going to be good. We live in the world. And as we know, the world is not good right now. And let me take that back. I always say that. People say, well, they didn't live in the same kind of world we live in now. We got a lot more stuff. But no, they had just as much sin back then as we have now. In fact, there might be some places where they do that, but I venture to say there's not somebody with a shrine to Moloch down the street sacrificing babies in the fire. At least not in our country. They had that back then. So, and a lot of people say, well, if I only lived back in the first century, I would obey, I would have followed Jesus. I said, you don't follow him now, you wouldn't follow him then.
How long has Jacob been away?
Almost 20 years. Or over 20 years, yeah.
A little over at this point.
Yep.
Back to the idea of how to get past the family feud. When we allow things to build up, Jacob had this big idea in his head that this conflict was going to resolve itself, and that he was going to come back and meet up with Esau, and there was going to be still this hatred, this anger. He still had this fear of death from Esau. He had built all this up in his mind because of this separation for all this time, when the real story was that Esau had forgiven him a long time ago.
Yep.
Esau was well past it and over it. Esau had been blessed in his own right, and his eyes had been open to that, and he was ready and willing to embrace his brother, and happy to meet his family, and willing to give and help him any way that he could. But Jacob had it totally twisted up in his head because he had waited so long to resolve it. So to me, that's a big part of it, is we don't need to wait to resolve things. If we allow things to fester and to simmer like that, especially within our family or even our church family, it becomes a very difficult thing to solve sometimes.
Have you ever, and I know you have, I'll get you in just a second, have you ever had somebody say, he has some kind of rift with his brother, or a rift with somebody, or they left some church and went somewhere else, and they go, what? I don't even remember. I don't even remember what the rift was, but it's still there. Well, it's not really there if you don't remember. Yes, sir.
Well, back to what you said about not sacrificing children down the street. Well, there's over 1 million babies aborted.
Well, yes, there are.
The religion of self-importance.
Correct. Like I said, we got bad stuff going on this too, but
When the
can't
60s
compare.
In the 60s, when I was in school, high school, hippies, miniskirts like worse than they are today. Ladies not wearing undergarments, and the free drugs, and hippies. I mean, people start telling me how bad it is now, the drugs and this, that, and I think it was bad back then too.
Yes,
not to
it
mention
is.
alcohol, but there's also a lot of good. There's a lot of good people, and I'm sad for that person that don't want to be the worship service with God's people.
Right.
That's the fun part.
And I've also heard it said about when a Christian that is prejudiced, and I go, souls don't have a color, and who do you think is going to be in heaven? Everybody's going to be in heaven. I said, you think there's going to be a special spot over here just for you, so you don't have to associate with anybody else? No, you may not be there.
People ask me that all the time.
Yep.
They say, what color are we going to be in heaven? I said, I don't know. We may be black, white, striped, but if you're there, I'm going to say, brother, you look good.
Now,
The shame of it is kind of in relation to this. Right before this meetup, this reconciliation, Isaac wrestles with God, the angel, the man that
right.
I think in my version it says it was God.
Mm-hmm.
And the name of the place has to do with wrestling with God. I think the point of that is that this entire time that there wasn't reconciliation and that Jacob was concerned that it wouldn't go well, Jacob wasn't saying that he didn't trust Esau. He was saying he didn't trust God, because God had promised that reconciliation
Exactly.
was there. God had promised that he was going to handle it, and Jacob didn't believe God, and so he's wrestling with God. So we're the same way sometimes. I think it's a real shame if there are people that are outside of the church, or those who have fallen away, and they're scared to come back because they think that they're not going to be accepted, that they won't be forgiven. And obviously God's going to accept them and forgive them, but then sometimes what about us that are here? Are we going to accept them and forgive them?
Right. I got a note about that we're going to run out of time. But in verse 11 of chapter 33, Jacob tells Esau, please take my gift which has been brought to you, because he tries to give it back. I don't need it. He goes, graciously dealt with me, and I have plenty. Thus he urged him, and he took it. So he did, begrudgingly took it. And Esau says, let me live some men with you. I'll go on ahead of you. And Jacob's making every excuse possible that he doesn't want to go to where Esau lives. In fact, he didn't go. He went another way, even after he said, I'll come along later. So he's still deceiving his brother. Doesn't trust him.
Do you think, yeah, I think he was afraid of it.
He doesn't trust him. He's going to snap. He's going to kill me when I get there. So here's my conclusion. There are many things we could take from the story of Jacob and Esau, but maybe the most important one is how hopeful their story is. Jacob and Esau literally were fighting each other from before they could remember, before they even came out of the womb. One of them cheated the other in a massive way and looked as for a while as revenge was going to settle their rivalry permanent. Instead, Esau forgave Jacob and they reconnected. Contrary to how it's often explained, forgiveness does not act like wrongdoings never happened. Depending on our situation, it may not always be possible to make restitution, which may be what Jacob was aiming for with all these gifts he was trying to give him. However, this does not mean we should not repent of our wrongdoing, forgive our wrongdoers, and work toward reconciling. We may find that just when it looked like someone couldn't care less about forgiving us, they are actually preparing to reach out and give us grace. I appreciate all your comments and your attention. I'm not sure who teaches next week. I don't remember. But I know it's going to be, yes, sir. Oh, you're teaching next week. All right, I know it'll be a good lesson. Y'all come back then. Thank you.